We turn our attention to a little statewide politics. Joining me in studio, State Representative Dustin Burrows. Welcome back.
Welcome, Chad. Thank you for having me today.
Well, glad to have you in studio, and your first session is done. How'd it go?
I think it went very well. You know, get to come home. There's a lot to be proud of in what we accomplished down there, both as a entire body and caucus and also individually, and happy to get home and visit with people about that and start making plans perhaps for future sessions.
Yeah, it was a session that I think a lot of people said went well overall. Obviously, there were some disappointments, but that happens every session.
Yeah, you're not going to get everything fixed. You know, some things are just ever evolving what it is. But we found additional funding for public education, higher education, transportation. We were able to provide some much needed property tax and franchise tax relief. We balanced the budget, and it only grew within population plus inflation. And if you could have told me at the outset we could accomplish all those things, I would have said it would be fantastic if we did, and we did. And I'm very proud to get to come home and visit about that with people. What are
some of the things that when you went down to Austin and this is your first session, what are the things that some of the things that you took away from just your first session, some of the things maybe you learned from the session?
Well, try being in a body of 149 other people. All of them are very much type A. They're very much, are there representing 180,000 people who are very diverse regionally, culturally, in their thought process of what's important. And to try to figure out how to maneuver within that body is something that nobody can prepare you for. People can try to tell you, but until you actually go down there and get a chance to understand the process, it probably takes you 4.5 months just to get your feet kind of on the ground and settled to figure out exactly how you maneuver within that. And then the session's over, and that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, we're visiting with State Representative Dustin Burrows. Let's talk about some of the legislation that you worked on, that you pushed. What are you proud of?
So there was one bill I went down there with. I would say this is probably one of the bigger accomplishments I had this session, dealing with agricultural liens. And a lot of people, I don't want their eyes to gloss over, so I'll give the real quick version of it. What I found out because of representing cotton farmers and agricultural farmers for 4 or 5 years in my private practice is you could take you could go get a bank loan, you could grow your product, you could take it to a processing facility, deliver it. 5-6 months could go by, not get paid for it. That processing facility could go into bankruptcy or shut its doors, and you might not get paid for that product. And the bank who lent money to that processing facility might own your product despite not being paid for it. Mm. And I thought that was just wrong. I mean, just fundamentally wrong that somebody else shouldn't be able to own a product you haven't been paid for. So went down there, hand wrote a lien, thanks to Senator Charles Perry, thanks to Drew Springer in a neighboring county, and Kyle Cassell, ended up getting that bill passed. It was signed by the governor, and so it's going to help our farmers out, and I'm very proud to have worked very hard on that this session.
Was that something that you heard from a lot of the ag community and rural community out here about?
I did the math when I was running for office in November, and I represented, at the time, I think close to 400 different farmers in this region. So I was very much in touch with them and understood what it is that we needed as an agricultural area, and this was a priority issue for us. And so I was very proud to take my experience and help drive that and work on that all session.
One of the things that when I was down in Austin and we did the show, you were talking about the pharmaceutical community, and tell us about what happened with that bill and the progress of that bill, and maybe future plans regarding that topic.
Yeah, so I mean, when I went around visiting with people and constituents and just understanding what is one of the biggest issues we're dealing with, not only as West Texans but the entire state of Texas, and it's the rising cost of health care. I started looking into it and realized that the cost of health care is 2 to 5 times greater over the last 20 years than what all other goods have risen, measured by CPI or Consumer Price Index. And so it's an unsustainable path that we're on. A big component of that is going to be pharmaceuticals. And you do some investigation, you find out, for instance, there's a hepatitis C drug that actually cures hepatitis C, which, of course, the state of Texas is largely paying for in its prison population. And in the United States, it costs $84,000 for a full round of treatment. You can go to Egypt, same manufacturer, same supplier, same distributor, distribution lines, same marketing, everything, and it costs $800 for the same round of treatment. So you look at the price discrepancy and you realize it's not just this Sovaldi, which is the hepatitis C drug. It's steroid inhalers, $200 in the United States, $15 in Western Europe, and the list goes on and on and on. So I filed a bill wanting to study to see if whether or not we allowed the importation of these pharmaceutical products from abroad would help drive down the cost and what the impact would be on the state budget. We looked at we talked about patent evergreening, where the process at the federal level is they keep these patents up over and over and over again so they can drive the prices up, and what the effect of not allowing Medicare and Medicaid to negotiate prices at the state level has on price competition. So it was really a more of a market-based solution to pharmaceuticals. Had a 2-hour layout. I had individuals from the Baker Institute come testify. We got a lot of good publicity on it, and I think it got a lot of members thinking, you know what, maybe part of government's interference with the market is what is driving these prices up. So I think it was a good conversation. The bill did not get out of committee. However, I think I had I got a lot of conversation, a lot of traction with it, and now so I was very interested in it. So you asked, what am I going to do with it next session? If the voters choose to send me back, I'd like to expand this to a broader conversation about all health care. And, what are the things that we could do on a market-based solution to drive down healthcare costs? Do we need to increase the number of doctors so we have more supply to help drive? Do we need to look at scopes of practice? Do we need to rethink the way that we're offering insurance products such that we have people putting skin in the game, and so there's a motivation to actually compete on price? Do we need to disclose what prices are in the marketplace so people can make a better choice? And so I'm right now meeting with some people around the state, trying to get together an entire comprehensive plan and roll this out and say, this is the one big agenda item that I would potentially have next session is what can we do looking at this? Because I'm afraid if we don't start looking at a free market Texas model, we're going to end up with some sort of socialized medicine, which is antithetical to what we are and what we want.
Right. Visiting with State Representative Dustin Burrows. And I think it is important to point out that even though it didn't get out of committee, it started a conversation, and that's where a lot of these things start.
And that was really my expectation. I did not assume when I filed the bill, especially as a freshman, and especially given the novelness of the idea and some of the competing interests on the other side, that it would go very far, other than I wanted other members to think about this, and I had lots of follow-up conversations from it, so I consider that a success.
Great. Let's go ahead. Let's take the break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with State Representative Dustin Burrows here in studio. We'll be right back. You're on News Talk 790 KFYO. Back on the Chad Hasty Show, Representative Dustin Burrows in studio with me to give his final thoughts or his wrap on his first session, this past session down in Austin. Representative Burrows, you brought up just a couple of those relationships that you that you had working on some of the legislation, including Senator Perry and I believe you said Darby as well, or Springer. I'm sorry. Who are some of the other lawmakers that you worked well with and really forged relationships with down in Austin?
Well, you brought up his name, I didn't, but Drew Darby was certainly one of them. I spent some time, every time Drew filed a bill, I'd email him if I thought I was going to be opposed to it and let Drew, visit with me and kind of go over part of maybe some of the reasons why I ought to be for it. And so I had a lot of conversations with him. John Smithy, who's the dean of at least the Panhandle South Plains delegation, I worked with John, asked him a lot of questions. John Frullo, of course, because he's from Lubbock, we represent, a lot of the same, community. So John and I sought across the aisle from one another. So I visited with him about what is good for Lubbock, what's good for LISD, and those types of issues. And so I stayed within the delegation, had a lot of conversations. Then, of course, with other, fiscal and social conservatives, I had a lot in common, just given, my background and involvement with the party. I visited with some across the state and have forged some good relationships with them.
I've asked just about every lawmaker who's come on since the session has ended, any regrets or disappointments about this session?
Well, I always I try to be optimistic. I look at the positive things that we actually did accomplish. Certainly we left some bills on the table that I would like to, see us work on next session. I think appraisal reform is one of them. I think, we were able to give some property tax relief this session, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are looking at the rising cost of their appraisals each session, which is in essence a tax increase, and they'd like us to try to address that comprehensively. I don't know exactly what the right solution for that is. There's probably multiple competing different versions of it, but I'd like to look at that to help property owners. Paycheck protection, which is stops the practice of automatic deduction of union dues from people who may not otherwise want to pay them. It's kind of a forced unionization. It was a bill that did not make it onto the House floor, and I'd like to see us come back and work on that. And there's some life legislation and things that I think next session I'd like to see us working on.
There was a story out of the Texas Tribune this weekend, and they've been doing their wraps on the session as well, and it's about unemployment taxes. And Texans are going to see unemployment taxes go up just by a small percentage. What were your thoughts on the bill? And the Tribune article, it almost takes, how I read it at least, it kind of takes a whack at the whole notion that the legislature cut taxes, but hey, you increase taxes over here. What were your thoughts overall on this bill that passed?
Well, at the end of the day, kind of my philosophy in the office is we took one bill at a time. We looked at it and we said, is it constitutional under the U.S. Constitution? Is it constitutional under the state Constitution? If somebody asked me about it individually, and they said if it's a fiscal bill, if there's a fiscal note, do you really want to spend money on this versus, say, public education or transportation? Because at the end of the day, we're competing for resources. And so by putting money, say, for instance, in the film industry, you're taking money, in my opinion, out of transportation because we have spending caps. With respect to, any sort of tax increase, I think, is what we're trying to avoid. But I concentrate on the larger picture, which is stopping incrementalism. If you don't give, $1 or $2 million over here to a specific, some people say, oh, it's a rounding error. It's not a big deal, but those rounding errors add up over time. And so if you consistently try and stand opposed to incremental increases in the size of government, you don't have to do tax increases and you can fund the necessities. I mean, my core philosophy, and I think most of the independent third parties will say, Dustin was a social conservative this session. He was, a high-rated member on that. He was a fiscal conservative. And fiscal conservative, to me, is just like I said, there is a there's a pie, and we're competing for it. And so if you want more money for public education, if you want more money for transportation, if you want more money for higher education, the core staples of government, you have to stop the incremental increase in non-necessities. And that's how I live my life and how I think West Texans are.
Campus carry, obviously, that was one of the major headline bills that passed out of the legislature. What is your vision of campus carry? What do you anticipate that looking like on college campuses? Because there is a big unknown about what it will actually look like.
No, I think it is. I think at the end of the day, we gave some broad discretion over to the college campuses. Now, if they come back and say, okay, the only building you're going to be able to actually carry on campus is some storage building over here, that ain't going to work. I mean, we're going to come back and we're going to address that and put some more specifics. But this was, of course, a bill that I would have told you 2 days before it passed it was never going to make it. It was placed deep on a calendar that had a clock ticking. I'm pretty sure if we didn't give our universities the discretion they were asking for, it never would have actually come up and been passed because it wasn't passed until I think 11:45 on a night that we had a midnight deadline. I have a lot of confidence in Chancellor Duncan. I have a lot of confidence in the Board of Regents at Texas Tech. I don't think that I think they're going to come up with reasonable restrictions, and we're going to know it when we see it. I mean, either we're going to go on Texas Tech and people who want to carry their guns are going to realize that this is either working or it's not working, and we may have to fine-tune it. But of the bills that were filed this session, I think there were 6,000. I would dare say a good percentage of them, if not a majority, were trying to address legislation that we passed the previous session to try and fine-tune things.
One of the more controversial votes, maybe, that you made and others as well, it came down to the speaker's race, something that started very early on and has already begun again down in Austin. You did not vote for the speaker, Joe Straus. He's already announced his intention that he's going to run for speaker yet again. First, let's go back to your vote against Joe Straus.
I would characterize as a vote for Scott Turner.
Okay. Voting for Scott Turner then. What was your disappointment and reasoning in not voting for Straus, and looking into the future, have you made a decision not to vote for Joe Strauss again?
So first off, kind of going back over the entire situation, I try to be positive about the entire thing. In fact, I think you can look over my track record, and I've never been negative about Speaker Strauss. And I think that, there's a lot that we can be proud of that he accomplished during this session as the leader of the House. Going into this race, there's a lot that went into my thought process, but certainly I had announced, at least with respect to the 2015 session, that I would be supporting a more conservative or Scott Turner, having visited with both of them, and I felt like I needed to live up to what I had announced and said. I have not spoken to Speaker Strauss since he announced that he was going to run for re-election. I'm really focused on my own race at this point in time and, trying to get my legislative agenda together. And I would, of course, look for a speaker who's going to help me support my legislative agenda and one that's good for West Texas and the state as a whole. And that's what's important to me.
I guess one of the debates that kind of goes from that is, depending on how you vote, does it impact? Did your vote? Do you think it impacted your standing? Maybe within the Republicans down in Austin. Do you think it impacted your standing among leadership? Any blowback there?
Well, I think I had to work a little harder, than maybe somebody who, say, voted for the person who ended up winning the speakership. I mean, for instance, a lot of my bills that ended up passing didn't have my name as the primary author. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with that. I mean, they passed. It's not about me. As long as they passed, it didn't matter to me if I got the recognition or not. But, I had to work with other members. I had to work a little bit harder. I had to get some of my bills on as amendments, rather than basically letting them get through the process, and that's just part of it. But I never mind the hard work. In fact, I think sometimes that builds character and standing in the long term within the body.
There were some who in Austin who looked at conservatives as maybe, I don't want to say losing clout, but it seemed like it, at least for at least the Tea Party, and I don't know if you would consider yourself part of the Tea Party or not. But there were some who said that maybe they lost clout and maybe we need to have a more conservative House. How do you expand that conservatism in the House when you have already so many Republicans that are in the House?
Well, I think it's, like I said, you have 150 people down there. I believe it was 98, Republicans, and we all represent different areas with different goals. I mean, I feel very much a connection to taxpayers. I mean, when I think about, money being spent by government, I think about it as taxpayers' money, not as government money. Not everybody feels that way. Mm-hmm. Some people believe it's government money and it's okay to spend. It's just, kind of, your core philosophy and what drives you and how you do it. And I think going down there and advocating, but I think advocating in a positive manner, rather than just a completely negative manner, will help you bring that to the forefront of people's minds. Visiting
with Representative Dustin Burrows, just a little bit of time left. Now what do you do between now and the next session? And you already said that if people will send you back to Austin. So obviously you are running, but how do you mix that in with state business as well?
Well, I know I don't have all of the ideas out there, and I don't have all the best ideas. And so really over the next several months, my goal is to go out, visit with constituents and different stakeholders, explain, what we did, why I voted the way I did, and then ask them, okay, if you're satisfied that I represented you well, how would you like me to represent you next session? What ideas and things are on the top of your mind? And so really I'm looking for feedback and, from my district to say, okay, here are the, 3 or 4 or 5 things that we really want you to work on next session so that I can prioritize and, next session I can advocate and, make my votes commensurate with what our priorities are as a region.
All right. State Representative Dustin Burrows, appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
We'll visit with you as the campaign continues, all right?
Thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate you having me.